Hi, this is Dave from Secret Weapons. Today shooting a video with some tips and tricks for remote start Prewire. The car we're going to be using today is a 2016 Toyota Prius C. We're going to be installing a Viper 4115 with a DBL. First thing I like to do is make sure that it is actually in fact a 2016 Toyota Prius C by checking the VIN number. It's going to be the 10th digit that you're looking for. After verifying the year of the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and flash the DBL by using our XK loader and the DirectText website. We're going to be only using pages 14 and 15 of the install guide, so there's no point in printing out the entire thing. Just a waste of time and a waste of paper. Once you've printed out the pages that you need for the DBL, it's a good idea to also print out the DirectText page. In the DBL guide, you'll notice there are numerous dotted line connections. These are being taken care of for us via data-to-data. There's no wire-to-wire hookup needed. If you're using an ALCA, there would be dotted line and red line connections also being taken care of data-to-data. Before going to the bench to actually do our pre-wire, it's a good idea to try and find the wires you're going to be using within the car. If it's a car you've done recently, you might remember where those wires were. But if it's a new car to you, you're going to want to find them so you can run your wires together in groups. There are four main locations that we're going to be looking for in this car: the ignition harness, the ECU, the OBD connector, and the fuse box. Doing a proper checklist is essential on every installation job. You want to be noticing for things that you're going to be integrating with, such as the gauge cluster, if there's any check engine lights, low tire pressure lights, etc. Checking to make sure that the vehicle's door locks actually all function, things like that. The last thing you want to do before going to the bench is make sure you can find a good location to actually mount your brain. You want it to be away from any moving parts, brake pedal, steering wheel, etc. Now that we've reviewed the install guide and located all the wires in the vehicle, we're ready to start an actual bench prep. The goal of bench prep is to actually get rid of all the eliminated wires that we don't need, get them out of the way, and make it a much cleaner install. There are many different schools of thought behind wire bundling, whether that be tape, zip ties, twisting in a drill, Tessa tape, etc. We're not going to get into that debate. There are different ways to do it and make it look clean. Just make sure that you don't overuse tape, especially the expensive Super 33. Before we start, there's a copy of the Viper Quick Reference Install Guide that's inside of the box of every Viper Remote Start unit. It's going to give you the basic wire color and function of that wire. Now that we have the brain secured to the bench, go ahead and plug in all of the harnesses that you're going to need. Now there are different schools of thought on how you're going to organize these wires and get rid of them. Some people like to grab only the wires that they're going to actually use, pull those to one side and cut the rest. I personally like to grab all the wires I'm not going to use, and then everything left hanging is going to be the ones that I am going to use. During this, we're going to be using the Viper Quick Install Guide, DirectText sheet, and pages 14 and 15 of that TL10 firmware that we were speaking of earlier. We're going to stagger cut so that way when we tape these, there's not a chance of the wires touching each other, creating any issues there. Being that it is a lower current ignition harness, and we're running both of our constants over to the main fuse box, we don't need to actually run both of them, so you can clean up your power wire just a little bit by only running one of the wires, connecting them together here closer to the brain. So we're going to go ahead and tape all of these wires together after we ground our neutral safety here. You'll notice that I'm going to be doing a little bit of soldering. Everything SOP-wise for an underhood connection and a data connection needs to be soldered, but a military splice is just fine for other connections. A good solder connection, you're not actually going to be having the solder touch your gun. You're using the heat going through the wire to help the solder penetrate through the entire connection. This is what's not a cold solder joint. If you're dragging solder from your gun up onto the solder, you're only tinning the connection. You're not actually penetrating through. While we let that cool down before I tape it up, we'll grab our DBL, being that we're going to be doing most everything on this via data-to-data, which is why we were able to cut so many wires. We're going to plug in the D-to-D port on our brain here. and into the DB-all. We really only need a few connections here with our CAN high, CAN low, sill wire and RDA wire. This vehicle does not have auto headlamps, so we don't need those wires whatsoever. Same thing on the DB-all harness. We're going to stagger cut everything that we do not need. So with all these connections stagger cut, we can go ahead and tape these up. You don't need to go crazy with it and tape all the way. Now on the red harness from the DB-all, all we need is the sill data and the RDA, so we're going to go ahead and slash cut all of the other wires here. With both of these plugged into the brain, we can then tape the sill data with the CAN high and CAN low, because those would be the only three connections going to the OBD. Then we can go ahead and zip tie the DB-all to the brain. Also a good idea to do something with the extra wire on this data-to-data cable so it doesn't get caught on anything in the underdash there. A zip tie or tape will work well here as well. Go ahead and tape up that constant power wire connection that we had done. Some people also like to put tape over the head of the fuses just to make sure that when you're in a metal underdash, one of those can't risk grounding out. We got our ignition wires that are going to go over to the regular ignition harness. Once again, some people zip tie, some people Tessa tape. I just do a little bit of a spaced gap there with the tape just to keep them together so that way you're not running numerous things to one location. You just grab one bundle and go. Some people also like to make sure all of their connections from the brain go off in one direction just to make it easier to mount the brain, and then everything splits from there. And we've got our constant power to the back of the fuse box, our ignition harness going to the ignition, OBD2 and sill wire connections, RDA at the ECU, ground, and then hood pin that we may or may not need depending on if the module does it via data. Now that everything's pre-wired, we can go ahead and take the bypass and the brain into the car, hook it up to all the wires that we'd already previously found. It should be a pretty fast and easy remote start install.